Hello, so today I'll be talking about the Asian financial crisis, what it entailed, what happened, and what really caused the crisis. Um, the Asian financial crisis, also called the Asian contagion, was a sequence of financial devaluations and other events that began in the summer of 1997 and spread through many Asian markets. The currency markets first failed in Thailand as a result of government's decision to no longer peg the local currency to the US dollar. Currency declines spread rapidly throughout East Asia, in turn causing stock market declines, reduced import revenues and government upheaval. So now, um, understanding the Asian financial crisis as a result of the devaluation of Thailand's baht, a large portion of East Asian currencies fell as much as 38%. International stocks also declined as much as 60%. Luckily, the Asian financial crisis was stemmed somewhat due to financial intervention from the International Money Fund, IMF, and the World Bank. However, the market declines were also felt in the United States, Europe, and Russia as the Asian economy slumped, right? As a result of the crisis, many nations adopted protectionist measures to ensure the stability of their currencies. This often led to heavy buying of U.S. treasuries, which are used as global investments by most of the world's government. So, let's take a look at some of the causes of the Asian crisis, according to Investopedia. You know, the crisis was actually rooted in several threads of industrial, financial, and monetary phenomena, and in general, many of these relate to the economic strategy of export-led growth that had been adopted across developing East Asian economies in the years leading up to the crisis. And let's see, according to the source, what was really the cause of this crisis, right? You get to see a list of things that really happened and really caused the crash and the crisis. So, um, long-term causes of the Asian financial crisis was actually foreign debt to GDP ratios that rose from 100% to 167% in a short while. And in the four large Asian economies in 93 to 96, foreign companies were attracting capital inflows from the developed world. Investors in the West were seeking better rates of return, and the Asian economic miracle seemed to offer better rates of return than lower growth economies in the West. And here's another cause was actually current account deficits. So countries like Thailand, Indonesia, South Korea, sorry, had large current account deficits. This meant they were importing more goods and services than they were exporting. So you already understand that once a country is actually importing more than they export it's going to have a huge influence on the economy, right? And it was a reflection of a very high rate of economic growth and consumption. The current account deficits were actually financed by hard money flows on capital account. So hard money flows were accumulated because of high interest rates in the East. And another cause was actually fixed or semi-fixed exchange rates. So this made currencies vulnerable to speculation. Also, interest rates were used to maintain the value of a currency, causing relatively high interest rates in SE Asia, which caused hard money flows. Now, another cause was actually financial deregulation. So encouraged more loans and helped to create asset bubbles. But the regulatory framework and structure of banking and firms meant loans were often made without sufficient scrutiny of profitability and rates of return. So when you keep getting loans and keep getting loans, it's really going to have an adverse effect on your economy. So this is what really happened. They kept on getting loans, they encouraged more loans, helped to create asset bubbles, but the regulatory framework and structure of banking and firms meant loans were often made without sufficient ways of actually keeping more you know, hands on why they were getting loans. So another cause was actually more hazard, right? So with a strong political desire for rapid economic growth, governments often gave in implicit guarantees to private sector projects. This was magnified by the close relationships between large firms, banks, you know, and also this was actually as a result, you know, of um, the plans that would be supported by the government. Now, another cause was actually over exuberance. The booming economy and booming property markets encouraged expensive borrowing by firms. It also encouraged international investors to move the capital to these fast-growing economies. There was an element of irrational exuberance, the idea that Asian economies were undergoing an economic miracle where high returns were guaranteed. So now, let's take a look at some of the causes which precipitated the crisis. Actually, we've seen the long-term causes of the Asian financial crisis. Let's see the causes which precipitated the crisis. So one of which is the higher U.S. interest rates in the 1990s. The U.S. started to increase interest rates to reduce U.S. inflationary pressures. Now, Asian currencies started to fall, and the government struggled to keep exchange rates at their fixed level against the dollar. Of course, once your rate begins to fluctuate and it doesn't stay in a certain way, it's not stable, it's going to have a huge effect on your economy. And also, one of the reasons actually contagion, right? On July 2nd, 1997, due to speculative attacks, Thailand was forced to float their currency, the Thai baht. This caused a rapid devaluation, which triggered a loss of confidence throughout the Asian economy, and soon other countries were forced to, devalue as investors wanted to get out of Asian currencies. Investors realized the previous optimism was starting to look misplaced. So another cause was actually the debt default, right? In the run-up of the crisis, both government and private firms built up high external debt ratios. Wow. However, the devaluations caused the debt repayments to become more expensive. You understand, right? Once you get a certain amount at a certain price and they devalue the currency, of course, you got to get more to even pay, you know, what you initially had to, borrow, right? And at this stage, the IMF intervened to try and stabilize the crisis. However, their intervention has proved very controversial, with many arguing that the intervention made things even worse. Higher interest rates in Indonesia and the Philippines did not stop the devaluation of their currency, suggesting investors were not convinced such high interest rates were sustainable. Wow. So, and also the IMF insisted on, fiscal restraint, lower spending, higher taxes, and, privatization. Economists such as Joseph Stiglitz and Sachs, emphasized the importance of market sentiments in increasing the magnitude of the, problem. Initial problems was containable, but because confidence evaporated, thus was a fight there was a fight of investors, like a classic bank run causing an unstoppable downward momentum, right? So here's the impact you can get to see in the form of you know great, right? Impact of Asian financial crisis. You can get to see here. Indonesia had a negative 43.2, Thailand negative 21.2, Malaysia negative 19, South Korea negative 18.5, and Philippines negative 12.5. And you can get to see some other causes were actually severe recession, inflation, actually devaluation caused import prices to rise, global effects, and well, you can get to see here it was reading stated that the Asian crisis hit investors' confidence in the U.S. Though lower interest rates helped to stabilize U.S. economy, China was largely, insulated from the crisis because China had attracted physical capital investment and did not rely on foreign flows of capital. The crisis had a negative effect on Japan's economy and they struggled with a decade of low growth. And how did they recover? To a large extent, the Asian economy had recovered from the crisis. In particular, South Korea, Malaysia, and Hong Kong had enjoyed strong economic growth. So basically, everything was okay afterwards. They were able to fight their way back to the top, and now they are actually having one of the strongest, economies in the